been doing this for quite some time. And so we're very happy that you're able to join us in what will be a series of rolling events starting today. And we'll be continuing on into tomorrow, and it'll also be continuing on into next week. So please try to watch some of our events if you have time. All this is being recorded on YouTube, so the events will be posted online after they're over. So please, if you don't have time to watch it now, please watch it later. We're really delighted to have everyone join us for this time of year and for this very important event. Afghanistan has been in the news, and Jamestown, as many of you know, has been covering Al-Qaeda and been covering the issue of Afghanistan and the wider issue with Islamic State and the offshoots of Al-Qaeda around the world. But this year, we decided to focus our Terrorism Watch Week on Afghanistan and to begin an event with some of these prominent experts. And so that's why we're many of you may be asking why we're looking at this time. We felt after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan that this issue needed really a deep dive to talk to some experts about the repercussions of it. In today's discussion, we'll be focusing on Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrawal, the Taliban versus Islamic State, and the regional security environment. And given the expertise of these individuals today who know Afghanistan quite well, we thought we would try to start off with kind of a basic, what are their impressions and how is Afghanistan developing, and then work our way into kind of how they see the Taliban versus Islamic State, how that is emerging and evolving, because it's certainly becoming a big terrorism security threat for the new Taliban government. So it's bringing up a lot of interesting questions. And as Jamestown always kind of keeps its eye on and pulse on the region, we want to make sure we focused on that today. So our first speaker will be Antonio Gustozzi, who is currently a senior researcher at RUSI in London. And so we're delighted that he is with us. Antonio is prolific, to say the least. He's written a number of books on Afghanistan, and these books many of you are familiar with them. And these books are all kind of have ranged in topics over the years. One of the books that he wrote that I thought is certainly relevant now and prescient in terms of its coverage is Islamic State in Khorasan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and a new Central Asian jihad. This book is certainly very relevant for today's situation, and so we're very much looking forward to kind of what he has to say. So I will begin the discussions by having Antonio speak for 15 minutes, and then he will be followed by Abubakar Siddique, and I'll do his introduction then, followed by Sudha Ramachandran. Many of you who know and read Terrorism Monitor follow her work. So Antonio, please, the floor is yours. What is going on in Afghanistan, and please explain to us kind of what your perspectives on how the Taliban are evolving now that they're in power, and how will this affect their relationship with Islamic State and trying to deal with their own insurgency?
Hello to everybody, and for some reason my camera is not turning on, so I'll speak off camera. I will start, I think, from some considerations about how the Taliban took power, because that's very important to understand what happened after that. And the main point, the Taliban didn't expect to take power so quickly. They did expect, of course, to win the war, but not that quickly. And the Gandhara leadership of the Taliban was expecting to essentially reach power through some kind of coalition with groups and politicians, leaders hostile to President Ghani, but still part of the lineup of the old Islamic Republic, which of course didn't happen. And the main reason why it didn't happen is because Kabul was taken not by the Kandahari Taliban, but by the Haqqani network, which was not part of the plan. You know, the Kandahari leadership was trying hard to essentially make sure that their forces from the south would be taking control of Kabul first. And that's why we didn't see a lot of activity in the southeast, in the east of Afghanistan, while very intense fighting was going on in the north, in the west, in the south. So that plan failed. I'm not going to discuss why it failed and why the Afghans took Kabul, but the fact is that they took Kabul. And so, of course, they leveraged vis-a-vis the Kandahari leadership increased immensely. And there was certainly quite a bit of friction in the early weeks, which preempted the immediate formation of a caretaker government. It took weeks to form it. It took the mediation of the Pakistani ISI for that to happen. And when it happened, of course, the Haqqanis had quite a significant presence in that government, most notably Sirajuddin Haqqani as Minister of Interior. Now, in reality, the Haqqanis are not overrepresented in the Taliban cabinet. Their representation is roughly adequate or representative of the actual strength within the Taliban. So basically, we cannot say they're overrepresented, but the Kandahari didn't want them, and the reason why they didn't want them to be in a prominent position, of course, is because that would have created immense problems afterwards in terms of earning international recognition, which it did prevent from happening. Now, of course, we don't know exactly what would have happened if the Haqqani had not been in such a prominent position, but it's likely that recognition would have been easier. And, so we have two elements here: Taliban, lack of preparation, one, and two, the presence, the Haqqanis in prominent position within the cabinet. That has led to a number of consequences. First of all, the fact that the emirate, the de facto government, is starved of cash. The cash reserves of the central bank, of course, are frozen. They cannot use that. And of course, as expected in this kind of situation, there's been an immediate collapse of economic activity, which translates into a reduction in tax revenue. Taliban actually were not even able to collect taxes for a couple of months. Now they started collecting taxes, but of course, they can collect only so much if the economy is collapsing. They are collecting customs, but of course, imports are also collapsing. So that also limits the amount of revenue they can collect. Plus, they still have issues about, they lack skilled, qualified personnel to collect customs and taxes. It's not for everybody to become an agent of the Taliban in collecting taxes. And of course, this unexpected position of strength of the Haqqanis has created or reinforced the power struggles within the Taliban, which is still going on and delaying, certainly affecting decision-making, delaying that. And it's creating additional issues because Sirajuddin Haqqani, as Minister of Interior, is clearly trying to use his position to consolidate and strengthen the influence of the Haqqanis. So basically, he's appointing people essentially on condition that they join the Haqqani network if they're not members yet. In particular, this applies to governors because the Minister of Interior now again appoints provincial district governors and chiefs of police. And that, of course, has created irritation among other Taliban groups and networks, because basically Sirajuddin is stealing their commanders and their leaders at the local level. That creates friction. It created a situation where a number of personalities of the Taliban, especially in the south, are not collaborating with the Ministry of Interior. And of course, that means that the ability of the Taliban to effectively control territory, manage, in particular, of course, the counterterrorism and the counterinsurgency effort, because now being the government, they are doing their own type of counterterrorism, their own type of counterinsurgency that is disrupted by the fact that there is this lack of cooperation. And of course, being a new government, even where the Haqqanis have influence, there's poor integration, poor coordination between the Ministry of Interior and the Taliban, who have now become police in many cases in the provinces and the regions. So that doesn't help them in keeping the situation under control. They, of course, have not been recognized by any country. I have to say that at the regional level, they are doing rather well. Apart from India, of course, almost all the other countries in the region have good relations for now. There have been tension with Iran, but at the end of the day, the Iranians are still trying to engage with the Taliban. Of course, the Pakistanis they also had issues, especially with the Kandahari Taliban, but they're still overall having a constructive relationship, so to speak. The Russians, the Chinese, the Uzbeks, the Turkmen, but also Turkey and Qatar. They've been quite, and the United Arab Emirates have been rather constructive or even helpful with the Emirates. So overall, at the regional level, I think they are in a relatively good position. There are difficulties in running the country, because are compounded by the lack of financial resources. The Taliban in reality still have their own, as an organization, as opposed to as a state, their own source of revenue. Because the drug smuggling is still going on, the Taliban still tax it, the drug smugglers still contribute to the Taliban coffers. Smugglers in general, or whatever, they pay taxes to the Taliban. Mining is still taxed by the Taliban as a movement, as an organization, not by the Taliban state, not by the Emirate. So they have the sources of revenue, but there are indications that there are problems in managing this, because the sources of revenue are not evenly distributed across the country. They're mainly in the northeast for mining, in the southwest for smuggling. The local Taliban are essentially trying to retain as much of this revenue as possible, as opposed to contribute it to the finance commission of the Taliban. And that again creates a situation where Taliban in the east, for example, are not paid. So there are imbalances, so to speak, that make coordination among different groups of Taliban, again, harder than they could be otherwise. So basically, Taliban counterinsurgency, Taliban counterterrorism have been affected by this great disorganization, which is not surprising. I mean, if we think about what the Islamic Republic looked like 3 months after the fall of the first emirate, it was even messier. Fortunately for them, they were not facing any serious insurgency, because if they had, it would have been a complete mess. Actually, for years after the establishment of the Islamic Republic, you had chiefs of police at the provincial level who were completely unable to manage their own police forces, their own provinces. So it was not surprising, it's still a problem. And of course, the relation with the Islamic State has always been very conflictual. Basically they fought from the very beginning, almost since the arrival of the Islamic State. There have been occasional ceasefires, but none of them lasted more than weeks. So essentially, they've been fighting a pretty hard fighting throughout the Islamic Republic time. The Taliban were fighting on two fronts. The Islamic State was focusing on fighting the Taliban. They did very little until recently to fight the Islamic Republic. They only started carrying out serious operations against Kabul in the summer of 2020. And it was pretty bloody. It was serious fighting. It was not perfunctory fighting. There was some overlap between the organization, with some elements of the Taliban sympathizing, having relation with the Islamic State. Some people, of course, significant numbers of Taliban defecting to the Islamic State, especially in the early days. But as a whole, the two organizations have been fighting each other quite bitterly. And this, of course, this fighting has resumed a few weeks after the collapse of the Islamic Republic, after the Taliban took Kabul. And the Islamic State essentially has redirected its campaign of targeted killing and terrorist attacks against the Taliban. What is interesting about this campaign that is it doesn't seem to indicate a high level of capacity of the Islamic State. So basically what they're doing, they are killing, assassinating, targeting whatever Taliban define. They're mostly very junior Taliban members who are killed, patrols, low-level individuals. They're not been able to target senior members of the Taliban. The only one who was killed in a counter-terrorist operation. So it was sent to fight the Islamic State. It was not the Islamic State trying to kill him. So essentially, they don't seem to have a very advanced intelligence of the Taliban. They don't seem to be able to target senior Taliban. They haven't tried to blow up, for example, Taliban meetings or to attack the ministries or whatever. So they're probably trying to do whatever they can. They certainly are taking a major risk in terms of sending out from their strongholds cells of skilled, essentially assassins, plus support elements. They're sending them out to areas where the Islamic State has not been active at all, or had only very limited activities in the past. And that in particular is places like Parwan province, Kunduz city, even Kandahar, areas where the Islamic State was not very active before, not active at all. We knew that in some areas they had an underground presence, like in Kandahar, they had a presence in the city. They were never active militarily before. And of course, quite a few of these cells have been identified and destroyed because, of course, it's not in Afghanistan today. You have a lot of Eastern Afghans or even foreigners migrating to Kandahar, for example. If you do something like that, if you move cells to a place like Kandahar, they're not going to last long because they will stand out. The neighbors will notice these strange guys with Eastern accents who moved in, the old guys, with our families. Same for other locations. So, of course, they knew the moment they did it, they would take significant casualties. And I think it's pointless to count how many Taliban get killed and how many Islamic State get killed. It's not initial body counts. The losses of the Islamic State are skilled terrorists. It's not for everybody to be an assassin. We need skills also for the kind of job, if you like. The support elements are not, green, uneducated village recruits. To have an urban terrorist cell, you need skills to set it up, to maintain it. And when you lose one, it's not easily replaceable. So I think it was the deliberate decision on the Islamic side to go on the offensive now when the Taliban are still trying to consolidate, when they're still in a position of weakness for all the reasons that I highlighted before. That was a decision because I think the calculus is not only now they're weak and then they will be probably in 6 months' time, but they also think that the situation may not last. This financial shortcoming of the Taliban, their isolation or relative isolation might be over by the spring. And at that point, the Taliban will be in a position to go serious on the offensive against the Islamic State. And it's important to understand that the Islamic State is vulnerable in many ways. They don't have right now a safe haven abroad from which they can operate in Afghanistan like the Taliban did when they were in insurgency. Their bases are inside Afghanistan. Their headquarters, the main bases are mostly in eastern Afghanistan. So their headquarters apparently is now in Nuristan. There are still some important bases in Kunar, although in the upper valley, so quite remote. And they still have a significant presence in some parts of Badakhshan. But essentially, this is eastern, northeastern Afghanistan. These bases are essential for the Islamic State, in order to maintain some kind of leadership, administration. Of course, they need financial capabilities because the Islamic State doesn't fund itself, the Islamic State in Khorasan. It has very little revenue locally for obvious reason that they don't control almost any territory. So they receive money from abroad, from the caliphate, essentially what is left of the caliphate. Most of this comes from Turkey, where the center of the caliphate financial operations is. And it's a significant amount of money. But of course, transferring it to Afghanistan is not that simple. You need the financial infrastructure to do it. It's not something you can probably do very easily being completely underground. So you need to have some kind of administration. You need to have a leadership. The leadership needs to be safe somewhere. They need to be able to meet and discuss and whatever. So basically, an organization like the Islamic State doesn't need somewhere, if you like, a brain, in order to be able to conduct operation. That's why they have still these quite large bases in some part of the East. And they think that makes them vulnerable. The fear, maybe they're wrong, but the fear of the Islamic State is that at one point, first of all, the Americans will resume counter-terrorist operations in coordination with the Taliban, perhaps not acknowledging it, a bit like they did previously. They would bomb from the air when the Taliban were attacking on the ground. Without acknowledging any kind of cooperation. But for the Islamic State, acknowledge or not acknowledge is still bad. The bombs still explode and the Taliban still can take positions, even in the in well-defended position in the valleys. And also they fear that the Russians and the Chinese at some point might intervene, especially the Russians. They believe that the Russians already have intelligence guarding operation in Badakhshan in particular, and they fear that the Russian could do something like the Americans did, bomb them while the Taliban attack them from the ground, they're advancing up the valleys. And they think that they having seen this happening before, they know they can resist this kind of combined operations. That's how they suffer their biggest defeats in the past. They don't have, at least for now, the capability to replace that level of losses that they were taking in 2019, beginning 2020. They do recruit, and maybe now they will recruit more, I don't know, but certainly losing tens of men every day is not something they can afford at this stage. So even if they're able to resist these operations, taking high casualties, trying to defend fixed positions is not something that could last forever. They would disappear essentially in 1 year or two if they were forced to fight for their bases. That's why they went on the offensive. That's why they're trying to catch the Taliban off balance, force them to concentrate as many forces as possible in the cities, because of course cities, especially Kabul, but also other big cities, they absorb a lot of manpower if you need to control them. And that's the main problem the Taliban have. They have very little presence in the rural areas. Their forces are concentrated in the cities. I think I'll stop here because I think I ran out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is a wonderful introduction, and I can finally see you. So your video is on. So please smile for the audience. We'll come back to you here in a second. I want to turn the floor over to Abubakar, who is a journalist working at Radio Free Europe. If you don't read Gandhara website, well, you should please read it, because he does wonderful research and analysis on that site. Abubakar is also the author of The Pashtun Question, the Unresolved Key to the Future of Pakistan, published in 2014. And he's repeatedly cited by the media and is an astute observer of everything going on in Afghanistan. So Abubakar, please take us from here and kind of give us your thoughts on what you see transpiring and kind of how this is evolving for the Taliban. I think Antonio laid out a very nice kind of overview of the situation in Afghanistan.
Well, thank you, Glenn. I agree with a lot that Antonio said, particularly with the fact that the Taliban were not expecting to assume power, and also this internal friction between some of the Taliban leaders, mainly between the Taliban leadership from the predominant Taliban leadership from the south, and then the Haqqani network from the east. I think overall, what we are seeing in Afghanistan is, in a very simple term, it can be characterized as the collapse of Afghan state in slow motion. We saw the Afghan government, the political system that emerged with the help of the Western powers. It collapsed very quickly in August. In days, the Taliban ran over most of the major Afghan cities, including Kabul, which fell into the Taliban hands without any fight. But I mean, since then, what we have seen is that the state is gradually collapsing. And what is not helping that process and what is kind of hastening that process are two things. One is the way the Taliban have behaved, both internally in Afghanistan and also in terms of arranging their international relations, and also how the West, in particular, and to a large degree, the United States has reacted to the developments in Afghanistan. I mean, just this week, ICG, the International Crisis Group, they issued a major report warning about this humanitarian catastrophe, which the UN is warning will be unprecedented, the worst humanitarian crisis probably of our lifetime. And this is happening because the Afghan economy that was created with the support of the help has largely collapsed. Nobody can, even the aid agencies cannot send money into Afghanistan. So even if like there are pledges about helping Afghanistan, they're not being translated into getting things into on ground in Afghanistan and helping the Afghan people. So this, I mean, whatever we are discussing is in this larger framework of a collapsing state in Afghanistan. The Taliban, of course, have recreated their Islamic emirate, which is something that they had, in a way, indicated that they will not do, or at least the Kandahari leaders or people who were running the Doha office had indicated that they will not, that they will resist, or it will be different. I mean, for example, I mean, there is all these reports about the infighting and disagreement. I mean, fighting not in the sense of physical fighting, but disagreement, in some cases, kind of public disagreements between the directions that Mullah Baradar wanted to take and Haqqanis. But I think there is one larger question in all this. When we talk about the Taliban, we should not forget that they are one of the most united and perhaps one of the most disciplined political organizations we have seen in Afghanistan in recent history. I mean, 25 years, near a quarter century of their existence, they've not seen the kind of defection and internal, sometimes violent politics that has been a characteristic of many of the other organizations. And by and large, the office of, or the person of the Taliban supreme leader is still organizing, is able to rein in the elements. And I think whatever the broad policy direction still follows his cue or his order. So that's something that at least I'm keeping them together. But in terms of attracting other people or other groups, the Taliban have miserably failed. I mean, Afghanistan has suffered a huge brain drain, and you can't have a state, functioning state, without the right people capable of running all these state institutions. And in Afghanistan, I mean, we have seen that everybody associated with the former government, everybody in an important policy position has left. The Taliban themselves, there are rumors, I've not seen an evidence of that, but there are rumors that the Taliban banned their government from letting anybody who has been part of the 4 top categories in the former government. I mean, we can see that, I mean, with the lack of professional cadres and stuff, they lack a certain level of domestic legitimacy. They have not done anything. I mean, obviously, they're not an organization that will go for elections or something like that, but at least Loya Jirga is a reasonable possibility. Even a grand jirga of the ulama that the Taliban held in their first stint in power would have done something. President Karzai is very vocal about it. He says that the Taliban can only path to Taliban gaining international recognition and legitimacy is to gather some kind of internal legitimacy. But the Taliban have so far resisted that path. As if, I mean, in some ways, they're again trying to do the same, that they somehow operate in a vacuum and they don't have to respond to some of the political realities of their society. I think they're broadly lucky in the sense that both inside Afghanistan and outside Afghanistan, opposition to their rule has not galvanized in ways that one would have expected. For example, recently, I mean, many of Afghanistan's neighboring states, Iran, Pakistan, I mean, all the Central Asian states, even Gulf, even as far as Turkey, have refused to let officials from the former government or senior former Mujahideen leaders to operate openly, to form political organization or mobilize political. So they do not have this kind of resistance. I mean, the only people who are actually resisting the Taliban inside Afghanistan are Afghan women. Right now, they've been holding all the demonstrations, all the protests against the Taliban. In the region, of course, I mean, people are looking at, I think everybody's looking at the Western approach and how they will be dealing with the Taliban. So Pakistan is all obviously, and other countries are holding on their recognition. Tajikistan is different in many ways because Tajikistan has clearly sided with one side in the Afghan conflict. It is it's understood that it's also reported that they are also hosting the elements of what the opposition that calls itself the National Resistance Front. The Taliban have, so the Taliban are not, I mean, they're not facing enormous opposition, but they are letting, they're not going politically actively against denying their opponents this political opportunity that they can cash if things go bad in Afghanistan. And of course, the way things are going bad in Afghanistan is primarily because of collapsing state, and also that's also part of that is the economy. So for example, by February or something, when there say reports of famine or children's dying of starvation will be common. I mean, the Taliban obviously are not a really popular movement across Afghanistan that they can then cash on their, I mean, they can go back on their support base. They have a very narrow support base still among the religiously minded people, Hanafis in particular. And one thing they have done wrong, just to add to the discussion about their fight with the Islamic State, is that the Taliban have not helped themselves by going after the all kinds of Salafis. I mean, the Islamic State is one particular part of the spectrum of Salafi thought or Salafi practice. But in Afghanistan, in the initial days, the Taliban were very keen on going after all kinds of Salafis, which initially pushed the Salafis away from them. But over the past month or so, many Salafi leaders have come and pledged their allegiance. But still, it potentially leaves the Islamic State opportunity to recruit more. Now, what I think the Taliban have one main advantage are basically an Islamic organization or Islamic movement that's narrowly focused on Afghanistan. They are not focused on exporting their rebellion, unlike the Islamic State. They're not a transnational movement. So that is helping the Taliban now. I mean, going to the future or immediate future, or what we're going to see, I think the big problem for the Taliban is, of course, the international recognition. And without international recognition, without some kind of understanding, I think even what we are seeing now, these opening of embassies in Kabul, that will not be enough to help the Taliban to restore some kind of a functioning state, because they need access to Afghanistan's frozen assets to revive the economy. They also need to be able to trade with the world. They also need to, trade with their own neighbors. For example, in Pakistan, which perhaps is one of the most favorable environments for them, the trade between Afghanistan and Pakistan has radically decreased since the Taliban takeover. I've been talking to traders in Quetta and Peshawar who do this kind of trade. They say that because of the sanctions, because of any bank to deal with Afghan bank on transfer money or guarantee payments or something, it's so difficult to engage in any kind of business with Afghanistan right now. And that is, you have a state that was largely dependent on international aid to already, that aid has overnight precipitated. There is no alternative arrangement. I mean, the whole debate and discussion about Afghanistan has been kind of an unresolved debate where even when the Treasury Department has issued these exceptions or licenses that allow the humanitarian community to bring money to Afghanistan, many of the banks are not willing to. I've been talking to aid workers, and they are not able to bring money to Afghanistan to spend it. For example, there are organizations that are really large with thousands of employees. They are right now they're allowed to cash something like $30,000 a month, while they have millions in their frozen accounts. So this whole thing is beyond even the Taliban cannot, and the Taliban are not really proactive. I mean, I think in their mind, they are very focused on these meetings that we really don't have any insight into with diplomats in Doha and elsewhere. But they are definitely not helping themselves by being able to articulate a position where they can convince the international community one way or the other. I think they are having more success in their kind of bilateral understanding with regional countries in particular, because they have good relations with China. Even before the takeover, they were, I mean, they had good understanding with China on key issues, on key Chinese security issues. Of course, Pakistan has been a main supporter. Iran has not opposed them, and Iran has crucially not attempted to play the religious or the ethnic card in Afghanistan as of yet, which again works to the Taliban advantage. But the Taliban themselves have not been able to do these very crucial policy things. On internal policy, for example, they have allowed girls from grade 6 up to grade 6 to get education everywhere. They're allowing some NGOs to allow to help a girl get education from 6th to 12th grade. Girls are going to classes in many universities. But again, many universities have closed because of the economic collapse, although, I mean, they are very keen on enforcing their segregation policies. They have not gone for these extreme hardline policies. For example, the Amar bil Maruf or the morality police, the promotion of peace and virtue department is not enforcing its policies, but it's become an organ which is preaching. The Taliban are letting media function at a minimum level. There are TVs and there are women working on TVs. But again, the number of Afghan journalists is decreasing by the day. The press freedom has, I mean, decreased a lot. I mean, we are not getting a lot of reporting from Afghanistan that we used to get. We get some reporting, but not a lot. And of course, there is a possibility that the hardliners within the Taliban will eventually prevail, because what we have seen since their takeover, that the Haqqanis have gone around and said, and perhaps prevailed in this debate by claiming that the second Islamic emirate is created because of the sacrifices of their ranks, because of the suicide bombers. So they held these ceremonies honoring the suicide bombers, giving money to their families. But it has made it very difficult for these other Taliban who have been promising the international community, people negotiating them for years, that the Taliban will not establish a monopoly of power, that the Taliban will be more inclusive, that the Taliban really are an Afghanistan focused movement that wants to rebuild an Afghanistan where everybody can live within, of course, what they call the Islamic thing. So I think for immediate future, the big takeaway is that the Taliban are right now their own worst enemies, and we really need to pay a lot more attention to this organization and what is happening within it, rather than all these debates about outside intervention, because I don't see that any state, after what happened, is eager to swiftly bankroll, but at least, but as Antonio said, if there are security threats emanating from Afghanistan, it will force states to come up with policy that might lead to military intervention or attacks, or also supporting eventually other groups. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a brilliant overview, Abubakar. I really appreciate the kind of the wide picture you painted about the internal challenges and also the external problems, and that going forward in the questions and answers, I want to come back and ask you some questions. I'm going to turn the floor over now to Sudha Ramachandran, who's an independent research analyst based in Bangalore, India, and she's extensively written on South Asian affairs for Jamestown, for the Diplomat, Asia Times, and others. So we're really happy that she's here, and I wanted to get kind of her perspective on the regional security environment, but also how India sees how things developing, because the Taliban initially, right after getting power, did reach out to the Indian government, and I'm kind of very curious as to how that may be evolving. But Sudha, kind of give us your perspectives on how you see the regional environment developing and what you see happening in Afghanistan and how it may affect India. Can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Glenn. Can you all hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, so, few events in South Asia have impacted the region as much as the rise to power, the return to power of the Taliban. In fact, analysts in India have compared what happened on August 15th in Kabul to 1971. That is when Bangladesh emerged an independent country, and when Pakistan lost over half of its territory. So, you can't really compare the two, but the point really is that how the influence, an influential actor in Afghanistan, that is India, how almost overnight its influence, came down to almost nothing. Now, of course, there were a lot of dramatic changes in the run-up to August 15th, as well as after that. As far as India is concerned, it's not just the coming to power of the Taliban, but really even before that, it was the exit of Ghani and the collapse of his government. And this, I would say, is very important, a huge loss, a huge setback for India, because, its investment in Afghanistan was not just in terms of billions of dollars. Unlike, in the past, this time, over the last 20 years, India had built bonds, had built a strong relationship, not just with Ghani, but with leaders across political groups, political parties, and importantly, across ethnic groups. So with the collapse of the Ghani government, India sort of lost all this, the bonds it had built in the government. Then, of course, the capture of power by the Taliban. Now, India's problems with the Taliban are not just to do with its being an undemocratic and misogynist organization. One is that, it's so when the Taliban came to power, it is a fact that relations between India and the Taliban have always been hostile. So that was hugely worrying. However, importantly, unlike other regional actors as well as the global powers, which had started reaching out to the Taliban, and especially powers like Iran and Russia, who had once collaborated with India against the Taliban, this time around India, felt very isolated that even these countries had open channels with the Taliban. Even in the run-up to the capture of power, while India was only, I would say at best, India's channels, communication channels that it had with the Taliban were nascent or perhaps non-existing. It didn't, by the time it reached out to the Taliban, I would say it was too little and too late. So anyway, so in the days or in the weeks after the Taliban captured power, India was in a highly vulnerable situation. There were fears, even in the run-up to the capture, when there was the India Friendship Dam, which India had invested and built. There was a fear in the country that this would get destroyed, that other projects in which India had invested, all these would get destroyed. So there was concern over the security of the investments it has made in Afghanistan, the concern for its own nationals living and working in Afghanistan, as well as, of course, the diplomatic staff. Now, India, of course, I guess in a knee-jerk reaction, very swiftly shut down its diplomatic presence. Or, earlier it had shut down the consulates, but soon after the capture of power, apparently the Taliban had reached out to India to retain its diplomatic presence. I don't know how true this is, but anyway, India just went ahead and shut down its diplomatic presence. So as a result of it, not only was India's influence in Afghanistan shaken or reduced considerably by events unfolding in Afghanistan, but also India's own actions of closing down its diplomatic presence played a huge role in India being in this absolutely friendless situation in Afghanistan. Another issue of concern at this time was, of course, like the other countries, India has been talking about having an inclusive government. Of course, by inclusive, India, I guess, really means politicians, from the previous regime, also politicians and leaders from the other ethnic groups. An important matter of concern, of course, was when the interim administration was announced. I think till then, India felt perhaps there'll be more moderates, or what it calls the Afghan nationalists. Rather than those who are, by Afghan nationalists, what India really means are the moderates. And what that is those people who will put, those people in the Taliban who will put the interests of the Taliban first rather than those of Pakistan. So when the interim administration was announced and the Haqqani network featured in a big way, I think India was truly concerned, really shaken, because even if it can, I think it's still possible for it to deal with the Taliban, but the Haqqani network is another thing altogether. And this is largely, of course, because it's widely believed in India that the Haqqani network is the sword arm of Pakistan. And India also believes, and also there's a history to this. India believes that the 2008 attack on the Indian embassy was carried out by the Haqqani network on the orders of the Islamic State. So I think an interim government or even a future government which is dominated by the Haqqani network would make it very difficult for India to deal with this government. Most importantly, I would say, is the rise of Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan, which was so visible, especially when the ISI chief visited Kabul. Now, in the first fortnight, I would say, was a period of extreme confusion for all world powers, but especially for India, which saw itself decimated so badly in Afghanistan. Since then, I would say it has recovered ground. On the 31st of August, Stanixai is believed to have reached out to the Indian embassy in Doha. Talks are believed to have taken place, which was, I think, a starting point or quite a breakthrough. In the months since, there was a meeting between senior Indian officials and the deputy prime minister of the interim government. And interestingly, the Moscow meeting, it was a closed-door meeting. And also there was a one-to-one between Indian officials and the Taliban, I think, which was where India offered its humanitarian aid, and they also supposed to have raised the need to respect each other's sensitivities or concerns. Also, in the months since, we find that Taliban officials have reached out to India. One is to open the flights to enable, those Afghans who are stuck here in India now. Also, there has been a request apparently to resume the scholarships that India has been giving Afghan students. So I think the Taliban government is also trying to, win back the support of its own population in these small but significant ways. Anyway, so there is interaction between Indian and Taliban officials. Then, of course, India, there is the humanitarian aid that is expected to take off soon. Now, India, of course, said that, it couldn't send the 50,000 metric tons of wheat to Afghanistan, and it would be able to do so only if Pakistan allowed overland transfer. Now, I think the Taliban also spoke to the Pakistani officials, and that seems to be sorted out somewhat. It will be Afghan trucks who go across Pakistan soil. Anyway, I think this India, which to some extent has lost its popularity in Afghanistan, the support it had among its people, I think India is working on trying to win that back. And of course, the important thing is this will allow India to also engage with Afghan officials. There have been reports that India is thinking of opening its embassy, but nothing much has come after the first report. So I don't know how serious or whether it's really moving. So importantly, I would say that, in the past few years, India, Russia had drifted apart on Afghanistan, especially because Russia was now willing to engage with Taliban, whereas India was not. Now, and this was visible during Putin's recent visit to India, where the two sides, interestingly, they discussed Afghanistan a lot. And, many of the sentences that were used in the joint statement, like, okay, they said that both sides agreed that Afghan soil will not be used by terrorist groups. Interestingly, in addition to mentioning the Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, this statement mentioned the Lashkar-e-Taiba. Now, in the past, I mean, just I think a few weeks ago, Russia, India, and China met for a meeting, the RIC, and there China had blocked an attempt to name Lashkar-e-Taiba. So that couldn't be done at that meeting. So at the recent meeting, we find that India and Russia have actually named Lashkar. So you can see a coming closer. They seem to be coming together on some issues at least. Now, it's interesting to see how India's dilemma has changed over time. Now, in 1996, it had a dilemma. Should it engage the Taliban or contain it? I think very quickly, India decided to go ahead and contain it. And so it got together, collaborated with Russia and Iran to support the Northern Alliance against the Taliban. Now, of course, once after the Taliban fell, with the Karzai government, India put in its, put in funds and every step it could take to consolidate its control and influence in Afghanistan. So initially, at least the first decade, it did not really reach out to the Taliban. Then, especially once the Americans started talking about, downsizing their troops and exiting and so on, India realized that it's a matter of time, that the Americans would leave, and also it would impact, India was doubtful that the government would survive. So the question increasingly being asked in India was, there was a growing support for accept the reality on the ground. India, it is time India accepted that the Taliban is going to come to power in some form, and we need to engage with the Taliban. The big question, especially in the last 1 year or so, was, okay, even if we engage the Taliban, who in the Taliban will be willing to talk to us? Who in the Taliban would it be worth engaging with? So, over time, during these debates, it was, India would often, diplomatic officials would talk about Afghan nationalists, that perhaps we'll engage with Afghan nationalists, meaning those who will put Afghan interests before Pakistan's interests. Basically, India was saying that it would speak to those who are not under the influence of Pakistan, or not, beholden to Pakistan for security. And then in the months thereafter, as we saw, India, the question is not should we engage or who do we engage with? Now it's become, how can we engage with the Taliban officials and try and reduce their dependence on Pakistan. I would say that right now, the big question is not so much about, is the Taliban good in, are we willing to work with the Taliban or not? But I think the big question is, how can we reduce Taliban's influence of clout over the Taliban? And in this question, I think India faces a huge dilemma, which is that if it engages the Taliban, I mean, there is no option. I mean, right now, it's not, should we engage or not? It is, how do we deepen this engagement so that we can continue to pursue our interests in Afghanistan, continue to pursue our ambitions in Central Asia and so on. So engagement is important, but I think India is not happy with the Pakistan capacity to veto enhanced engagement. Now, the problem for India is, if it engages the Taliban, it can, engages the Taliban, offers more, economic investment or whatever. Pakistan, this is bound to upset Pakistan, and this will, in all likelihood, prompt the Pakistanis to step up, support to Kashmiri militants. Now, if India, on the other hand, if India doesn't engage with the Taliban, it's going to be in a more difficult situation, because it's simply allowing Afghanistan to remain in the control of the Taliban and the Taliban and the Pakistanis. How much time do I have?
Yeah, we're going to have to cut it off because we're in danger of going over. And I'll try to, in the question and answer session, we'll come back to you and let you reinsert some of your thoughts and questions. I'd like to, and you raised some good, very important issues about the Taliban not shutting the door on in relations with India, that they have kept that open. And that brings up a larger question that I'm going to go back to ask Abubakar about, and that's regarding to Pashtun nationalism and some of the developments between the Haqqanis and the Kandaharis that Antonio was discussing. But I've got a question that I want to ask, and I think it's probably more from one of the participants and one of the attendees in the conference has a very interesting question. I think it's probably best, I'll start off with Antonio, if you can answer it. Antonio, this person is asking, Mohammed Shabir Ahmadi is asking, what is the strategy of Islamic State Khorasan in Afghanistan now, and how does it align with the global strategy of Islamic State? And their next question is about the leader of Islamic State Khorasan and the fact that there's some dispute whether he may actually be Afghan or not is in question and in play. So do you want to try to tackle that?
Sure. So the first question, the strategy, basically the short-term strategy is attacking to catch a Taliban off balance and preempt a Taliban crackdown on the Islamic State later, probably in spring. So, that's a short-term strategy. In the long run, I think the minimum objective of the Islamic State in Khorasan is to carve out a safe haven for itself and for a few other jihadist allies that it has in Eastern Afghanistan. They think Eastern Afghanistan is the most promising place for such a safe haven, first because, of course, the geography, it's difficult to negotiate for an outsider coming in, but also because of the strong Salafi presence in these areas. And I think the Islamic State has actually been trying to generate, if you like, to cause a sectarian conflict between Salafis and Hanafis when it started some months ago attacking Sufis and Hanafi clerics, probably expecting a reaction, retaliation of the Taliban, which then it did happen, especially at the provincial level, first in Kunar, then in Nangarhar. The Taliban, as I said, are quite disjointed, so these are more the initiative of provincial governors rather than a general policy. Then at the center, the Taliban have tried to mend fences with the Salafis. I'm not sure how successful they are overall, but I think that's the strategy. So basically, realistically, given what they know about the funding they can rely on, in the medium term, what they need to do is to establish a real safe haven in the East. Then, of course, ideally, yes, destroy the Taliban Emirate and take over, but that's like, a bit a utopia right now. On the other question, the leader is actually a Pakistani, this guy who, I did see that strangely, the State Department has I don't know where this comes from, because, there's no, it's quite ridiculous, trying to pinpoint this young Tajik from Kabul, 26 years old, as being the governor of Khorasan. This guy, 26-year-old, normally they would go for somebody with much more experience than that. And typically in recent years, they've been trying to appoint people who had been to the Middle East, like Afghans or Pakistani were people who would have spent time with the caliphate. So, more trustworthy people who know Arabic or learned Arabic, they could have direct communication, with their managers, so to speak, within the organization of the Islamic State, the central organization of the Islamic State. So definitely not somebody with a profile. And also in terms of education, engineer, it's not him. The leader is a Pakistani Pashtun who spent quite a long time in Iraq. And it's been selected because essentially it's seen as loyal and also being willing to do the Islamic State bidding, not pay, not side with the different factions. In the past, the previous one, Aslam Faruqi, was seen as too close to the Pakistanis because it was not like somebody with a deep sense of belonging to the caliphate. That was very controversial because, of course, it's a composite organization with essentially many Pakistanis, but also a lot of Afghans, of course, and especially Central Asian couldn't stand him, and they created a lot of friction. So this new, the current, it's also new, but the current leader, it was sent as somebody who would be more in line with the policies of the central leadership, which is not about factional infighting or internal power struggle, but of course delivering for the caliphate. I'm not sure whether he fully succeeded. There's still significant internal tensions between different components of the Islamic State, especially Afghans and Pakistani, but especially Pakistani and Central Asians. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that excellent kind of overview. And Abubakar, I wanted to go back to you. Do you have any kind of comments, observation, reaction to what he said? And can you tell us about kind of the future of Pashtun nationalism among the Taliban?
Well, the thing is that I've studied Taliban for a long time. I know I've interviewed some of their leaders who were then kind of reconciled with Kabul. And interviewed, I look at a lot of the things that they produce. Taliban have never claimed that they are a Pashtun nationalist organization. It is predominantly, the leadership is Pashtun, maybe the foot soldiers are Pashtun, madrasa-educated Deobandis or Hanafis. But they are very distinct from what we call Pashtun nationalism in Afghanistan and Pakistan that was manifested in many movements and many leaders and political parties in the past century. Amanullah Khan, the Taliban don't like Amanullah Khan, the modernist reformer king who founded, who won Afghanistan's independence basically from the British a century ago. Amanullah Khan is not a good character in Taliban's history of Afghanistan. They praise some of the other Afghan leaders, monarchs who have fought the Iranians or the British, but not Amanullah Khan. So the Taliban have never, even now when everybody criticizes them because of failing to include ethnically, an ethnically representative government, form an ethnically representative government, the Taliban are saying that we do not believe in ethnicity and tribalism. So the Taliban, I think that the Taliban are not going to engage in the kind of very emotional Pashto nationalism that, for example, Ashraf Ghani's government engaged, or some of the leaders, for example, Hamid Karzai represents in some ways. But in Afghanistan, it is a fact of life that the Taliban government is made up of predominantly of Pashtuns. I can see that a lot of the criticism, a lot of the opposition that they are facing now, particularly this opposition from among Afghan diaspora, is on ethnic lines. There is some talk of even partition of Afghanistan or something, but on ground, I don't see anything that is going that direction. The other thing is that the Taliban, as I said before, that despite their differences, despite everything that outsiders see that, for example, I mean, we have been saying for a very long time that the Haqqani network is kind of a separate organization, but the Haqqanis never see themselves as a separate organization. They see themselves very much part of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, if you go to Taliban origin, it's true that some of like what the original Kandahari Taliban, they were networks of madrasa educated students from southern Afghanistan. But then, of course, these kinds of madrasa educated networks, Hanafi madrasas or Deobandi madrasa educated networks prevail across Afghanistan in the east and also in the north. One of the Taliban's most effective military commander on ground has been Qari Fasihuddin, the Taliban chief of staff, the guy tasked with reorganizing the Afghan military, and he is a Tajik from Badakhshan. The Taliban didn't control entire northeast of Afghanistan because they didn't had any support among Tajiks and Uzbeks. Obviously, they had some people, some of the members among those ethnic groups. And the other one thing that I always tell people about Afghanistan is that when they think about ethnicity in Afghanistan, they should not think about ethnicity in Iran or ethnicity in Pakistan. Afghanistan is more like a carpet. It's very complicated. In Afghanistan, there is a large number of Pashtuns whose first language is Farsi, including the formal royal family, Zahir Shah and Muhammad Zais. A lot of Pashtuns in, for example, Western Afghanistan, in Herat and Farah, they speak Dari or Farsi as their first language, but they ethnically identify themselves as Pashtun, and that is true for a lot of Kabulis. So it's not easy to kind of categorize them. The Taliban have always faced this thing. In the 90s, the big thing was that they were, when they first emerged, that they were this group of Pashtuns from southern Afghanistan who wanted to bring back Zahir Shah, but I've never seen anything from the Taliban themselves that claimed it. And when the Zahir Shah came back, of course, they opposed him. So the Taliban are an Islamist movement that is focused on Afghanistan. but they're not focused on Pashtun nationalism. Although I think in some of their relations with Pakistan at some level are informed or maybe shaped by their ethnic affiliation. For example, the Kandaharis have largely been not happy with Pakistan, particularly after Mansour was killed in Baluchistan in western Pakistan in 2016. The Taliban leader, Nasrullah Mansour, many Taliban leaders left Quetta or Baluchistan, and they never returned to Pakistan until the fall of, and they're still in Afghanistan. So those are the dynamics. I don't think that the Taliban are keen on turning into nationalists, but one thing that I'm seeing is that because the society has changed so much, the Taliban are now more mute on some issues. For example, the Taliban have not outrightly banned the flag of what is considered to be Afghanistan's national flag, the flag of the fallen republic, the tricolor flag. Of course, one thing that has always distinguished them is that their communication, both internal and with outside, is predominantly in Pashto, which is the case right now. But at the same time, the Taliban have done a lot to undermine or haunt or kill even secular Pashtuns than anybody else had done in the past few decades.
Listen, thank you very much. For that kind of insight. I'm going to ask. There's a question from Jim Phillips and Antonio. You can answer this, Abubakar, and as well as Sudha. The question Jim Phillips asks is, what is Pakistan ISI? What do you think is going to happen now with Pakistan's influence inside of Afghanistan? How influential will it be in the Taliban's evolution? Will it, again, you think, start supporting Kashmiri militants from Afghanistan? Antonio, you want to try to tackle that?
Yeah, well, I think, of course, there is a lot of tension between the Pakistani authorities and the Kandahari Taliban. So I think in the long run, the influence of Pakistan will also depend on the outcome of, this power struggle within the Taliban, especially if it is true, as it is, rumor that the leader Abatullah is dead or sick, and therefore it might have to be replaced at some point in the future. So of course there would be certainly the occasion for all these power struggles to intensify, because the top job is still the top job, so everybody would want that. And the outcome of that struggle, of course, would be decisive. So I think, power struggle doesn't mean that the Taliban have to split or disintegrate, but that people like happened in the past lose their jobs, get demoted, sacked, and others take their place, and so basically in this case, because they are the government, that the composition of the cabinet changes and power shifts between factions. So that would be decisive in determining in the long run, Pakistan influence. Of course, Pakistan is always going to have a lot of influence because, Afghanistan is a landlocked country and needs access to the sea, at the end of the day, So Pakistan is the number one neighbor because that's the way you get to the sea. The easiest way to get to the sea. Of course, you could do to Iran, but it's not going to be as easy or as viable. And the northern route is important, but not as important as having access to the sea. So I think this is always going to be in a position of strength vis-a-vis Afghanistan. So I think that's one key element. And then, of course, other factors are the fact that clearly also from what Sudha was saying, the relationship with China, there is a partnership here between China and Pakistan in many regards. They do favors to each other in Afghanistan, which is not surprising given the close strategic relation they have. So that strengthens also Pakistan, because it is also China's interest that the Taliban at the end of the day have at least good working relations with Pakistan. So that is a major factor, because the Taliban in general accept different factions of the Taliban, that there is no real alternative to a strong relation with China from the economic point of view. I think the dominant view that is emerging that you can keep talking, but basically you won't see much money coming from America. A little bit from Europe, but not much from America. Therefore, the fate of the Emirate will be decided within the region. And there are not many countries there that are either able or willing to invest significant resources or money inside Afghanistan. They look more and more at China as probably, is not the number one, certainly one of the top partners of the Emirate in the future. So that really strengthens the position of Pakistan even further.
Abubakar, do you want to comment, or Sudha?
Yeah, I think like about Pakistan, again, I mean, people think of a Pakistan-Taliban relationship in some kind of a static or a given. I think they're more dynamic and things are changing. I think Pakistan largely understands that it's not in their best interest to try to micromanage the Taliban. The Taliban have done, I think, a good job after taking over Kabul to kind of being seen more of an independent government and independent and not somebody who is being micromanaged by Pakistan or Pakistani military, to be specific. The Taliban, I mean, you have to look at the relationship that the Taliban have cultivated with Qatar. Everybody, the Taliban are always present in Qatar. Mutaqi practically spends half of the foreign minister spends half of his time in Qatar meeting people. And that is something that Pakistan is definitely not controlling. The other thing is that this whole outreach to India is one other thing that, I mean, the Taliban have tried to at least assure India that it's welcome. I think the Taliban have been very keen on letting Pakistanis know that they should allow Indian humanitarian aid, particularly the wheat that India had donated, to go through Pakistani territory. The Taliban have been talking to the Pakistanis about this land route, land trade through Pakistan, which is something that all Afghan government had been advocating since the demise of the first Taliban regime. Karzai, Ghani, both have been very keen on that. So, and I think for Pakistan, also domestically, Pakistan is now has no political interests or domestic security interests to, in a sense, control the Taliban or make the Taliban run Afghanistan in a way that they did in the 1990s. For example, Pakistanis have tried to end to the opposition. It's something that's been opposed by many Pakistanis, to end the TTP insurgency, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, by negotiating with them. I was reading somewhere today that they have released some of the TTP prisoners, that they agreed to this prisoner release in this talks with the TTP, these negotiations with the TTP that were brokered by the Haqqanis. But I think for Pakistan, the question now is that, for example, they have achieved one major strategic objective, which is they no longer face a government in Kabul. They don't have to deal with a government in Kabul that they think is hostile to Pakistan's interests or Pakistan's integrity, territorial integrity. But they also, I think, have to deal with, worry a lot about the Taliban's future, and particularly the economic future of Afghanistan, because Pakistan's economy is virtually in free fall. Pakistani currency is even now today is half the worth of Afghan currency, Afghani, the Pakistani rupee. And Pakistan, the inflation is rising, discontented rising. There is a lot of opposition against the government because of its very poor economic performance. So Pakistan is, I don't think, in any mood to in any way able to celebrate what other people accuse it of as achieving this great victory in Afghanistan.
Thank you. I'm going to let Sudha, she wanted to comment on that question as well.
I think that Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan will remain strong, but the Taliban is not, I think, it's not going to let Afghanistan call the shots. Of course, a lot will depend on how much it depends on Pakistan. I think the Taliban will try to reach out to other countries as well to sort of reduce its dependence on Pakistan. I think what we need to watch closely is what is going to happen with regard to the TTP. I think that will be leverage that Taliban has against Pakistan. In terms of sheltering them or providing them sanctuary and so on. Another interesting development, I think, which none of us discussed was the Belt and Road Initiative and China. What role is China going to play in supporting the Afghan economy?
That's a very good question, and we're going to address that in our event with Raffaello Pantucci next week. So Jamestown is going to be on that. We don't have enough time really to kind of go into all of this. But yeah, it's a very good point about the Belt and Road and what China's role will be, because we did notice that, maybe if you want to comment on this, Antonio, that the Islamic State Khorasan was recruiting Uyghurs, suicide bombers, and that probably is a distinct part of their strategy to kind of seek revenge against China in some way for backing the Taliban. Do you agree with that, Antonio?
Well, there have been Uyghurs with the Islamic State for quite a long time in Afghanistan, but also in Syria before. Now they're still. So it's not something new. I think the fact that they sent one of them to carry out a suicide bombing in a Shia mosque in Kunduz was a deliberate provocation, because at the same time there were these Taliban efforts to resolve the issue of the Uyghurs who are not with Islamic State. There are a certain number of Uyghurs associated with Al-Qaeda, which were based mostly in Badakhshan in northeastern Afghanistan, and the Taliban at the time, when the suicide attack was taking place, were trying to convince them, or maybe even a bit more, coerce them to move. They wanted to move them away from the Tajik-Chinese border for obvious reasons. So they wanted them to relocate, and they were not very happy about relocating. And in the end, they managed to relocate most of them. Some defected actually to the Islamic State, so joining their fellow Uyghurs there in the Islamic State, and some others went underground, basically hiding in Badakhshan, probably with the complicity of some local Taliban sympathetic to them. So I think the idea of the suicide bombing was to embarrass, if you like, the Taliban with China and show to the Chinese, you want to support these guys, but these guys, can't really control the situation, or that kind of messaging.
I thank you for sharing that. And as we kind of running short on time, I guess the $1 million question that many Americans have about the future of Afghanistan is, do you think it will become a breeding ground again for Al-Qaeda and for terrorism? And I'll use that for you, Antonio, and Abubakar and Sudha. Kind of as the last question, and you can follow up with that if you want.
I think the big difference now is that there are a lot of breeding grounds for terrorism, compared to 2001. Now you have Syria still active as a breeding ground, but West Africa, of course, is major, between Mali, Niger, Nigeria, etc., is a very big breeding ground for terrorism. There's still the Islamic State active in Iraq as well. There are the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have a big presence now in Turkey, thanks to the Syrian war. The move, of course, they're not operationally active. They don't carry out actions in Turkey, but the financial center of the operation now is Turkey. So that's also important because, at least from the European point of view, if you're in Turkey, Europe is very close. And if you have a Turkish passport, it's very easy to get into Europe as opposed to having an Afghan passport, for example. So that makes a big difference. So you cannot never say, Afghanistan will not have any role in breeding terrorists in the future, because in any case, Islamic State is there. But in the big picture, the role will be marginal compared to the role that West Africa will have and other places that I mentioned. So that, I think, is a big difference from our perspective. I think the Islamic State right now is busy doing something else. It is surviving, fighting the Taliban. So nothing is a priority, to organize terrorist attacks in Europe is not even that easy from Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda also has to be careful now with the Taliban, that they don't think they can do things that irritate the Taliban at this stage. So I don't think right now is a major threat. In the future, of course, it depends on the evolution of the Emirate, on the evolution of the Islamic State and how this conflict develops.
Abubakar.
Well, I don't think that the Taliban are very keen on allowing anyone. I mean, they are actively fighting against the Islamic State, and they're doing their best to eliminate it to a man, which I don't know. I mean, how can the Islamic State be able to, control Afghanistan when the Taliban oppose it so much? The Taliban are also, I think, they have supported at least one Jamaat Ansarullah, this Tajik group that Dushanbe thinks is a threat to its security. There are some Chinese fears, but they have kind of built a relationship of cooperation and confidence with China to a degree that the Chinese are at least not going thinking about getting rid of them, but more of talking to them and keep on engaging. And the Russians are doing the same. They will, if the TTP reconciles with Pakistan and disappears, at least they will be helping in removing what Pakistanis have claimed is a major security threat. And of course, they have protected Iran from the Islamic State attacks by going after all these provinces that border Iran, which is something that I think is the main basis of confidence between Tehran and, if not all Taliban, at least the Kandahari core of the Taliban. So the Taliban have done very well on this, but I mean, the real paradox, the real question in Afghanistan's future is that internally in Afghanistan, I mean, at least for the moment, there is no alternative to the Taliban. There is no other organized political party, political coalition or something that can, for example, take over Taliban. Of course, there is no military or militant threat that is more or less limited to Afghanistan, for example, like the former warlords and all these Mujahideen organizations are nowhere close to what they used to be. So internally, I mean, you have to deal with the Taliban. That's a reality. And for the international community, there is no alternative to dealing with the Taliban. So the sooner they find some way, and for the Taliban, I think it's very easy. For example, if they allow today all girls to go back to school, which shouldn't be a big problem because the schools are already segregated in Afghanistan, and also make the right noises, although they've been trying to do, but I think they are also increasingly worried about keeping unity within their ranks, which may be driving something. And as Antonio pointed out, one major question that hanging over all this is whether the Taliban leader is alive or he's dead. The Taliban tried to answer this question by claiming that he addressed this madrasa in Kandahar, and they issued an 8-minute audio of that recording. I think.
Who are you referring to, Abubakar? Who are you referring to? Which leader?
The Taliban supreme leader, Akhundzada, Maulavi Hebatullah Akhundzada. The Sheikh Hebatullah, as they call him, the Taliban. And so, but we have not seen his photo. He has not come to Kabul. He has not met anyone. I think there were attempts that the Taliban issued his photo like they do with Siraj Haqqani, just by photographing his neck or from the back. But that's, of course, many people are not buying that. And in the meanwhile, Afghanistan is really walking into this humanitarian catastrophe, which if it happens, I mean, if we see in our screens Afghan kids dying, then I don't think anybody can predict the future of Afghanistan.
I think that's a very good point, and thanks for bringing that up. Sudha, did you want to comment? Do you see Afghanistan becoming a sanctuary supporting Kashmiri militants?
I think it will continue to provide sanctuary. And you see the strength that the Taliban has, or the leverage it would gain by having, different kinds of militias that are maybe active in Tajikistan or, any of the Central Asian states or the other surrounding countries. So it would keep alive its leverage by supporting or providing them with sanctuary. But certainly, I mean, I agree with Antonio that there are other more important sanctuaries.
Yeah, that's a very good, I would agree with that. And that was a great point by Antonio, pointing out all these different other areas of the world where you can operate. And we really just don't know. And I think the one common theme today that I heard in everyone's presentation is that the economics of Afghanistan and Taliban recognition will have a big influence on the future of where terrorism goes in the country, whether they may become a haven again or not. A lot of it depends on how well the Taliban govern, and then whether they get international recognition and economic assistance. So, well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Antonio, Sudha, and Abubakar for this wonderful insight and sharing your thoughts on Afghanistan and the rivalry between Islamic State and the Taliban and all the variables involved in making Afghanistan such a difficult country to kind of predict and monitor. And on that note, I encourage everyone to keep reading Jamestown's publications, Terrorism Monitor, and we will be having another event tomorrow at 2 p.m. on December 9th, Counterterrorism Challenge to the U.S. after the Afghan Withdrawal, with Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director of the Indo-Pacific Program at CNAS, and Bruce Hoffman, Professor at Georgetown University and also Jamestown Board Member. Also, Mike Vickers will be talking about it. And Afghanistan, he's the former Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. So look for you to see everyone tomorrow. Thank you. And we'll be posting this on YouTube. Thank you for participating today. And we look forward to seeing everyone virtually and hopefully in person sometime in the near future. Stay safe. Happy holidays.
Thank you.